Republicans have spent years investigating President Biden and his family. But now party leaders are turning their attention to Vice President Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz. The House Oversight Committee recently launched an investigation into Governor Walz's connections to China. Take a look at what committee chairman James Comer said on Friday.
Look, Minnesota is not your normal state where Tim Walz is governor. I mean, great people in Minnesota, but you also have, a huge population of residents in Minnesota that have come from other countries and have various different ideologies that don't really respect capitalism, and we're concerned about that because we have the strongest economy in the world, but we cannot have more government. We cannot operate like China does, where the government plays the major role in every business. The government has to have ownership in every business, and the government dictates every facet of our lives. That won't work in the United States. And this is what Tim Walz appears to believe. And we know he's taken students to China and tried to teach them that China's doing things the right way.
Okay, Rev.
I mean,
it's not a normal state. They have people from other countries, God forbid, who don't believe in capitalism.
And what does that mean? I think that what he's really showing is that the whole appeal that the Republican Party is trying to play on is an all-male, all-white kind of, we must preserve what we consider to be American, which is as outdated as bell-bottom pants. I mean, you can't deal with a country. First of all, many people in New York, many people in L.A., many people everywhere came from other countries. What does that really mean?
Every state has people from other countries.
So what Comer's really playing to is what Trump is really saying, this whole male white dominance, and they're other than us. Walz is considered a conservative Democrat at best. I mean, and a bulldog Democrat at that. So to try to make him other than that, and how do they give you a test on capitalism coming in? Many home-born Americans have questions about capitalism, especially if you get to the extremes of it. So I think this is how they're trying to play to that base of it's us against them. They're not one of us. That's where birtherism came from. That's where they're trying to deal with Kamala Harris now. And that's where now they're trying to take a Midwestern white male coach and make him something other than American. And let's not forget, it was Donald Trump that was writing love letters to the head of North Korea and that talks well of Putin. So if anybody was flirting with people that were not for capitalism, it's his own Republican nominee.
And we should note CNBC had a study recently where they deemed Minnesota the 6th best state in the country to do business.
It does it has a large population from Somalia, one of the biggest in the country, very dedicated to their state. I suspect that might be actually what he was referring to.
I think that's a fair guess. Meanwhile, former President Trump today is set to address a conference of the National Guard Association. It's being held in Michigan. The Detroit Free Press notes that it will be Trump's 7th visit to the battleground state this year. The event began Saturday and has featured high-level speakers from the military, including the chiefs of staff from both the Army and the Air Force. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. He is a Marine veteran who commanded infantry in Afghanistan as well as special operations in Panama. Congressman, good to see you again this morning. So former President Trump has at times been very derisive and dismissive of those who have served in the military, deeming them even suckers and losers. And now, of course, he addresses the National Guard Association. What do you make of it?
It's on brand for Donald Trump because he's always viewed veterans and service members as props, not as patriots. You may recall also that he wanted to do this ridiculous military parade when he was president. But when it comes to parades, he doesn't want wounded veterans to walk in them because he thinks it ruins the vibe for him. This is just who he is. He's a small and scared man, and it makes him feel big and brave to be surrounded by uniforms, and he hopes that it distracts from his record on the military and on national defense, which is that he got out-negotiated by Vladimir Putin, he got out-negotiated by Kim Jong-un, he got out-negotiated by the Taliban, and his own former cabinet officials, whoever wore stars themselves, have come out against him as a threat to national security.
Yeah, and his former chief of staff, John Kelly, confirmed many of these comments that he made, being critical of those who served. We should also mention, of course, what he said about John McCain back in 2015, that he preferred soldiers who hadn't been captured. And Congressman, let's get your reaction to this. This appearance today comes just a week or so after he made these comments when he lauded a wealthy donor, saying that giving her the Presidential Medal of Freedom was the, quote, better award compared to the top military honor, which is the Medal of Honor, because those recipients are often injured or deceased.
Yeah, and he's attacked Gold Star families as well. Donald Trump just fundamentally does not understand what it means to put country before self. It's an alien concept to him, and so every time he's forced to talk about it, he comes across as tone deaf because it's just a foreign conception to him. What I expect he's going to do, regrettably, is he's going to use this platform to try to swift boat Tim Walz and his 24 years of honorable service in the National Guard, because that's what he does. He attacks, he distracts, and he's going to engage in this desperate smear job. Let's be clear, Tim Walz served for 24 years. He deployed multiple times to disaster zones. He left 4 years after his retirement date, and then did terrific work for veterans as the ranking Democrat on the Veterans Affairs Committee in Congress, expanding access to the GI Bill. And you contrast that with someone like Donald Trump, who got 5 deferments from Vietnam, including a made-up one for bone spurs.
Congressman, what impact do you think this whole debate between Donald Trump and Tim Walz, or just Donald Trump generally, when it comes to the military and the kinds of things he has said about members of the military, what impact do you think it might have on undecided voters in your district?
It underscores how morally bankrupt Donald Trump is. I think that's really what this gets to. And I bet, frankly, if you're Tim Walz, you're kind of hoping Donald Trump keeps this up. Tim Walz is a tough guy. Tim Walz can take these attacks from Donald Trump. And so long as Donald Trump is fixated on these ridiculous, self-defeating and telling jives against an honorable man like Tim Walz, the more runway Kamala Harris has to talk about the future, to be someone who has a positive, joyful vision for the United States that unites us around our higher aspirations. And we see that it's working. We see $82 million coming in since last week, 2/3 of which are coming from women, 1/3 are new donors. This is momentum, and Donald Trump is out there belly aching and moaning about the past, as he always does.
Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts, thank you for being on this morning.